During the Second World War, German U-boats played a central role in the Battle of the Atlantic. Their mission was to disrupt Allied supply lines in order to cut Britain off from vital resources. Yet, although the U-boats were regarded as deadly weapons, life on board was anything but glorious for their crews. On the contrary, the conditions under which they fought and lived were extreme, and the physical as well as mental strain was barely imaginable. This report sheds light on the shocking reality of the U-boat war from the perspective of those who lived through it. The workhorse of the German submarine fleet, the Type VII, was a machine built for war, not for people. On just a few dozen meters of hull, 40 to 50 men had to live, work, eat, sleep, and endure. There was no such thing as personal space. To pass each other in the narrow passageways, men had to turn sideways and press flat against bulkheads. They slept wherever there was room, in narrow bunks squeezed between torpedoes, in hammocks slung above racks of food, or on makeshift boards laid over storage boxes. Many bunks were shared in shifts. While one man was on watch, another used the same mattress. When they swapped, the bunk was still warm from the last body. Sleep itself was a fragile luxury, constantly interrupted by alarms, orders, engine noise, and the creaking of the hull. The air on board quickly turned into a heavy, sour mixture of diesel fumes, sweat, damp clothing, stale bread, and slowly rotting food. Condensation dripped from the steel walls. When the boat was submerged, the air grew warm and humid. In tropical waters, the temperature in the engine room could reach 50 degrees Celsius. Working there for hours meant soaking in sweat, breathing hot air thick with oil and exhaust, and enduring a roar that shook their bones. When the sea was rough and the boat ran on the surface, water constantly poured in through the open conning tower hatch. Everything was damp. Clothes almost never fully dried. Rust, mold, and fatigue were constant companions. Isolation made all this worse. Patrols lasted weeks, sometimes months. There was no fresh news from home, no letters, no radio messages from family. The crew knew only the boat, the sea, and occasional laconic signals from U-boat headquarters. Many men later said they felt as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist, and only the endless grey of the Atlantic remained. For the first days after leaving port, there was still the illusion of normality. The crew ate fresh bread, eggs, sausages, fruit, and vegetables. But in the cramped, poorly ventilated interior, food spoiled quickly. Mold spread over bread, fruit rotted, smells multiplied. As the fresh provisions ran out, the men switched to canned stew, preserved meat, tinned vegetables, and hard biscuits. The menu became monotonous and heavy. Appetite dwindled, but nobody could afford to skip meals. The work was too hard and the watch system too demanding. Now and then, the war itself added a bizarre moment of bounty. In May 1942, for example, U-162 torpedoed a ship that happened to be carrying live poultry. If the situation allowed it, crews sometimes tried to rescue pigs or chickens from sinking transports, not out of compassion, but to have fresh meat during the next days. Drinking water was even more precious than food. Each man had only a few liters of fresh water for many days. There was no question of daily showers. Washing was reduced to a quick wipe with a damp cloth when possible. The single toilet on board was often partly used as storage space, and it could only be properly emptied under specific pressure conditions. If it was misused, or a valve was opened at the wrong depth, the result could be a disgusting backflow of waste into the boat. Shaving was a luxury that most men abandoned early in the patrol. German chemists developed a special soap that still worked in seawater, but few bothered to use it for shaving. Most simply grew beards. The textbook image of sailors in clean blue uniforms and white shirts had little to do with reality. On a U-boat, men wore whatever was warm and comfortable: sweaters, woolen caps, patched trousers, old jackets. The smell and the look matched the conditions: rough, stained, and exhausted. Despite the danger, not every minute at sea was action. In fact, most of a patrol consisted of waiting, searching for targets, listening, holding course, checking instruments. There were long stretches where nothing visible happened, yet the crew could never fully relax. Free time on board was a problem commanders took seriously. Too much boredom in a closed, overfilled metal tube was a recipe for trouble. Many captains tried to bring a good supply of gramophone records so their men could listen to music instead of inventing ways to distill alcohol from whatever they had on board. Card games were a traditional pastime, though some commanders discouraged gambling. Others tolerated it as a way to keep men occupied. Books were popular too, but when the boat was submerged, the lights were often dimmed to save battery power, making reading difficult. One strange privilege U-boat crews enjoyed was access to foreign radio. In Germany, listening to British or American broadcasts was strictly forbidden. On U-boats, this rule was quietly ignored. When the situation allowed it, some crews tuned into enemy stations, partly for music, partly to hear another voice from the outside world. If the sea was calm and the area was judged safe, the commander might allow a short break on the upper deck. Men went up to feel real wind, breathe fresh air, and look at the sky. Some sunbathed. The bravest even jumped into the ocean for a quick swim, tied to the boat with a rope. For a few minutes, the war seemed far away. Then the hatch closed again, and the steel pressure hull sealed them back inside. The U-boat war was, above all, a war of nerves. The enemy was usually invisible. Most of the time, the crew did not know whether they were safe or already being tracked by an escort sonar. When Allied destroyers or corvettes did pick up a contact, the atmosphere on board changed instantly. Alarms sounded, orders were shouted, and the boat dived as fast as possible. Once at depth, everything had to be quiet. Men whispered, moved slowly, and avoided unnecessary noise. Then they waited. Survivors described these hours as some of the worst experiences of their lives. Above them, depth charges exploded with brutal force. The hull shook, lights flickered, dust and rust rained from the ceiling. Every detonation sounded like the boat was being hit with a giant hammer. Each man silently asked himself whether the next explosion would be the one that cracked the hull and let the ocean in. Otto Kretschmer, one of the most successful U-boat commanders and captain of U-99, later wrote that his men nearly lost their sanity during a prolonged hunt by British destroyers. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. Some men trembled uncontrollably, others stared into space, unable to speak. It was not just the fear of death, it was the helplessness, being trapped in a steel cylinder, hearing the enemy above, and being unable to do anything but endure. On top of enemy action came the danger from the boat itself. U-boats were advanced for their time, but they were still complex machines operating at the limit. Diesel engines broke down, batteries failed, pumps jammed, valves leaked. Underwater, the boat depended entirely on its batteries. Once they were drained, the submarine had to surface to run its diesel engines and recharge, a risky maneuver when enemy aircraft and radar were watching. One particularly dangerous episode occurred on U-96, when the diving system malfunctioned and the boat could no longer safely submerge. The crew had to attempt repairs in the middle of the Atlantic, fully aware that they could be spotted and attacked at any moment. In the overheated, cramped engine room, men worked to exhaustion, drenched in sweat, trying to bring the system back online. A mistake could have meant either an uncontrolled dive to crushing depths or being caught on the surface, defenseless. The constant engine roar, vibrations, and stress took a physical toll. Many crewmen from the engine room suffered hearing damage or chronic headaches long after the war. Others developed stomach problems, heart issues, or permanent sleep disorders. For the men of the U-boat arm, danger was not an abstract idea. It was a statistic they all knew. Around 40,000 sailors served on German submarines during the Second World War. More than 30,000 of them never returned. In the later years of the conflict, a U-boat sailor's chances of surviving the war were worse than those of almost any other branch of the German armed forces. If a U-boat was sunk, there was usually little hope for the crew. A torpedo hit, a fatal depth charge pattern, a catastrophic mechanical failure, and the boat could plunge to the bottom in minutes. Conclusion. Life and daily routine on a German U-boat during the Second World War was an ordeal that only a few men could endure. Constant psychological pressure, inhuman living conditions, and the ever-present threat of death made U-boat service one of the most dangerous and exhausting assignments of the war. Despite their technical skill and discipline, it was ultimately the human will to survive that drove these men to keep fighting even in the darkest moments of the U-boat war.